The Kremlin announced today that Vladimir Putin is ready for direct talks with French President Emmanuel Macron after negotiations with the Americans on ending Russia's war against Ukraine have once again reached a deadlock. Emmanuel Macron was the first to say Europe urgently needs to talk with Moscow, reportedly with support from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Today, in response to the Kremlin statement, it was noted at the Élysée Palace that France is moving towards preparing such negotiations with the Russian Federation. And now, Emmanuel Macron himself has already begun to be called a traitor in Europe. But not directly because he wanted to hold talks with Putin, but because he did not support German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Macron betrayed Merz, and he knows that he will have to pay for it. Today, Financial Times published an article with this headline, citing European diplomats, noting that the President of France did not support the German Chancellor on the issue of using frozen Russian assets at the European Union summit, and thus betrayed him. Instead, Macron proposed a dialogue with the Kremlin. But as they say, don't jump to conclusions. Let's figure this out together. I'm Alex CPG. Let's explore this topic together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, write any detailed comment under this episode, and, friends, also subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, Emmanuel Macron recently suggested that Europe will have to resume direct dialogue with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, since the United States has not managed to broker a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. This means the war will continue, and Europe itself needs to look for a way out. Next, here's a quote from Emmanuel Macron. Either lasting peace will be achieved in the current negotiations, or we will find transparent ways to resume dialogue between Europeans and Russia with Ukraine's cooperation. Then it will once again be useful to talk with Vladimir Putin. Otherwise, European leaders will have to negotiate among themselves and with representatives of the United States, who will then discuss the situation with Russia. There you go. Afterward, President Zelensky addressed whether he had discussed with Macron the prospect of direct talks between Europe and Russia, and if he would support it. And so, Zelensky admitted that Macron really did raise the question of what the partners would have to do if America ultimately fails to stop Russia further. A quote from Zelensky, I told him that is Macron, and I repeat this frankly once again. We need to fight for the United States. We need to fight for the format where we are with all our allies, and America is the mediator, and there are European allies who support us. I think this is a strong alliance, and we need to fight for it. If that doesn't work out, then of course everyone will be thinking about other options and a different format. Well, there you have it. The Kremlin has stated that Vladimir Putin is ready for dialogue with French President Emmanuel Macron. The president of the Russian Federation's press secretary Dmitry Peskov announced this today. Quote follows, Emmanuel Macron said he is ready to have a conversation with Putin. It's important to remember what the president said during the direct line. He also expressed his readiness to have a dialogue with Macron. Therefore, if there is mutual political will, this can only be seen as a positive thing. Possible communication between the heads of state should be aimed at trying to understand each other's positions, rather than just lecturing each other. Putin is always willing to explain himself clearly and sincerely. But, it's not for Peskov to talk about lecturing, because it's Putin who constantly brings up the Pechenegs, gives pseudo-history lessons to anyone he meets, and so on. However, the dictator Putin's position has long been clear, and at the last direct line, he stated that he had not abandoned the position he announced back in 2024. He demands that Ukraine withdraw its troops from 4 Ukrainian regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, and give up its NATO membership. Ukraine's leaders have repeatedly said they won't withdraw troops from Ukrainian regions. And I can't even imagine what exactly Emmanuel Macron wants to hear from Putin that's new. Putin doesn't need persuasion, he needs to be hit hard. But Macron is acting differently now. The Élysée Palace welcomed Putin's desire to talk to Macron, and here is the statement from the Élysée Palace. It's worth being glad that the Kremlin publicly approved this approach. We will decide in the coming days how best to proceed. However, Macron's team also emphasized that any negotiations with Moscow will be conducted in full transparency with President Volodymyr Zelensky and the Europeans. Paris's goal remains achieving lasting peace for the Ukrainian people. Quote, now that the prospect of a ceasefire and peace talks is becoming clearer, it is once again useful to talk to Putin. It's still unclear what the benefit is, but remember the last time the presidents of Russia and France spoke was July 1, 2025. Before that, they hadn't had a conversation. It's been 3 years since Putin launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. However, the last phone call did not produce any substantial results. But even that wasn't the reason why Macron has started being called Friedrich Merz's traitor in Europe today. The Financial Times writes that German Chancellor Friedrich Merz made a last attempt to convince European Union leaders to use 210 billion euros of frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. When he tried to do this, he realized he was missing his key ally, Emmanuel Macron. The publication promises that during the week leading up to the next summit in Brussels, which took place on December 19, the French president did not publicly express opposition to the German proposal. But in private conversations, his team expressed concerns about the legality of the initiative. And they warned that France, which has debts, would have difficulties providing a national guarantee if the assets had to be returned to Moscow in a short period of time. And here I will quote the Financial Times, as more and more countries, including Italy, joined Belgium, where most of the Russian assets are located. And the government, which from the very beginning was opposed to this plan, Macron joined them, burying this idea. Macron betrayed Merz, and he knows that there will be a price to pay for this. But he is so weak that he had no other choice but to support Giorgia Meloni, said a high-ranking European Union diplomat. And now the Financial Times notes that this stalemate highlights a new dynamic between the two largest countries in Europe. On one hand, there is a truly proactive Germany, and on the other hand, France, which is hesitating. After Friedrich Merz came to power, Berlin once again asserted itself, while Paris, in the second half of Macron's last term, found itself, as the publication writes, on the sidelines due to high national debt and political instability. This imbalance has shattered hopes for a serious reboot of Franklin. Here, as you can see, France and Germany have really always been driving forces like a locomotive, and of course sometimes the United Kingdom as well. But when the British left the European Union, France and Germany truly became the driving force. Friedrich Merz himself declared a reset of relations with France as his priority, since his predecessor Olaf Scholz, let's say, only showed indecisiveness. Here's another quote from the Financial Times. Friedrich Merz's programs included a commitment to strengthen European defense in the face of an unreliable United States administration, Germany's abandonment of opposition to nuclear energy, and a reduction in European Union regulations. However, since then, the German leader has been forced to deal with Macron, who has lost influence and has serious limitations in his ability to make commitments. Those who receive financial assistance. This is a complete reversal of roles between Macron and Merz. For the past 4 or 5 years, the prevailing opinion in the Élysée palace has been that Germany's weakness undermines Europe's ability to act. Now, there is a chancellor who understands geopolitics, who wants to get involved and do more for Europe. But it is Paris that is currently unable to fulfill its part of the agreement. Friends, write your opinion about this in the comments to these episodes. It's very important. How do you feel about the initiatives of Emmanuel Macron, and do you agree with the Financial Times article saying that Macron is showing weakness right now, especially in light of the fact that he called for a dialogue with Vladimir Putin? Friends, I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you get notifications about new episodes. Friends, if you found this episode interesting and helpful, you can support our work with your donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details provided. In the description of this video, it clearly says support the Alexei Pechi channel. Select any support format that suits you. I will be grateful for any of your donations. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.